Shall we make a start? Great. So, as I said, bore da a croeso i'r seminar y bore yma. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Tirweddau Cymru Landscapes Wales seminar. My name is Ruth Lovell. Some familiar faces on the list of attendees coming in, but I'm the coordinator of Tirweddau Cymru, and along with my colleague Eleanor Roberts, we're based in Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority. Before I hand over to Chris Lindley, the chair of Tirweddau Cymru, to tell you a little bit more about the partnership and the day, I've got a few housekeeping rules to go through. So attendees will be on mute unless invited to ask a question, and we have got lots of time for questions during the session today, and we have got a Q&A function. So if you have got questions while our presenters are delivering their presentations, please feel free to ask the questions there, and then we'll have time to go through those. And if you'd like to ask your question in person, we can also do that. We will have a short comfort break as well around the sort of 11:30 mark, so chance to grab a cuppa and then rejoin for the remainder of the session. This is a bilingual seminar, and if you would like to use the interpretation options, there's a little globe at the bottom of your screen where you can select your language. So if you want to listen in English, please select that option. So if we want to try with the interpretation now, we can just check that's working. So if
you'd like to listen to the meeting in Welsh, select Welsh in the options.
And the interpretation ar waelod eich screen.
In the options bar at the bottom of your screen and the interpretation globe.
So any problems with that, please let us know. Drop us a little message in the chat and we can make sure everybody's set up with translation. We are also recording the event, so we can share that with people who were unable to make it today, and with you all as well. So any issues with recording, please let us know again. I think that's everything in terms of housekeeping. I'll now hand over to Chair of Tirweddau Cymru Landscapes Wales, Chris Lindley. Thank you.
Diolch Ruth, and croeso pawb. Welcome all to our autumn seminar. Hopefully from which you're expecting to hear about the designated landscapes of Wales and about our work in taking action on the climate and nature emergencies. I'm just going to start to give you some brief context to the Landscapes Wales partnership, how we've been working together, and how the Sustainable Landscapes, Sustainable Places Welsh Government programme has been managed to make much of this work possible. So Tirweddau Cymru Landscapes Wales is the name of the partnership of designated landscapes in Wales. The partnership is formed of the 5 AONBs and the 3 national parks in Wales, along with Welsh Government, Natural Resources Wales, and the National Association for Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty. The partnership developed out of the Welsh Government review of the designated landscapes in Wales, and then the statement of priorities for their future, outlined in Valued and Resilient in July 2018. This statement includes an intention to establish a national partnership to develop a robust culture of collaboration, whilst also providing scrutiny and challenge on designated landscapes priorities and delivery. So here we are. As well as our partnership officers, Ruth and Eleanor, integral to this partnership has been the Sustainable Landscapes, Sustainable Places programme. This Welsh Government capital investment in our landscapes is enabling actions around Wales that deliver against our shared priorities, which are reducing carbon emissions, responding to climate change and nature emergencies, welcoming visitors and managing sustainable tourism, and promoting a green recovery. All of which, of course, have been further influenced by the impacts and repercussions of the pandemic. We're now in the second full year of the programme, and the work that you'll hear about this morning is just a handful of the projects either completed or underway. In total, the partnership is overseeing more than 8 million of funding, delivering more than 90 projects, and these include 29 delivering decarbonisation outputs, 11 nature-based solutions and nature recovery projects, 44 supporting sustainable tourism, and 11 delivering for a green recovery and supporting community resilience. So I hope that you'll find the presentations interesting. We'll look forward to seeing your questions in the chat box as and when they come to you. And first up, I shall introduce Tegryn Jones, Chief Executive of Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority. Tegryn, over to you to tell us some more about projects in the decarbonisation theme. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Chris. Thank you, Chris. And nice to see you, virtually see you all. Right, I'm going to try and share the screen now. So hopefully we will find this works. I take it that's worked. There we are. Excellent. Diolch yn fawr. The first presentation is on decarbonisation, decarbonisation. In 2017, the Welsh Government set the ambition of achieving a carbon neutral public sector by 2030, and the Sustainable Landscapes and Sustainable Places Fund has provided the means for the designated landscapes to work towards achieving the goal. The guidance we have provided for eligible activities in relation to decarbonisations were projects to decarbonise authority activity and assets, schemes to enable decarbonisation in communities, including appropriate renewable energy, and carbon sequestration schemes in the landscape. So over the last 2 years, 29 decarbonisation projects have been funded through the SLSP scheme. So these are roughly 11 green building projects, such as retrofitting buildings, renewable energy and reviews, 6 projects replacing equipment with zero emission electric alternatives, 8 electric vehicles, 80 EV charging points and an e-bike charging point. Land's been purchased and management projects for carbon sequestration have been developed. And then looking ahead, we've got 2 collaborative carbon baseline and action plan projects. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is just give a brief overview of some examples of what we've done on some of those. So the first one is to look at greening our work. Designated landscapes own or manage a number of different buildings. They range from Celtic Iron Age forts to purpose-built buildings, and they include offices, visitor centres, attractions, and toilets. Often these have been repurposed from their original use. And an example of this is the old station at Tintern in the Wye Valley, which is now a visitor attraction with a cafe and exhibition. Using SLSP funding, the building has been made more energy efficient, while work has been undertaken by the Llŷn AONB to renovate the public toilets at Morfanefin Beach and make them more energy efficient. This includes installing solar panels on the roof to reduce future running costs for the authority and reduce carbon emissions. While most of the projects have focused on decarbonising buildings, the Gower AONB has undertaken a project to transition their countryside management equipment to electric versions to enable better, cleaner and quieter working, while a number of the designated landscapes have invested in IT equipment to enable remote working options to continue and to be taken forward and developed. Emissions through transport is challenging for all designated landscapes due to their rural nature, and the promotion of public transport, such as the coastal bus network in Pembrokeshire, has long been an area of work. SLSP funding has been utilised to transition fleet to electric and hybrid vehicles. In total, 8 electric vehicles have been purchased, and these vary from pool cars to vehicles for wardens. This includes the first all-terrain vehicle purchased in the Dee Valley and the Clwydian range AONB. Anglesey AONB have purchased an electric tourist information vehicle in order to raise awareness and promote Anglesey's coast, countryside and attractions.
Tegryn, could I just interrupt? I think we're getting messages saying we can only see the first slide from your presentation. Are you able to move them on, or is somebody else able to move them on, please?
Okay, they are moving on as I speak, actually. On mine, I'll try again. Is anything moving there?
No, we still have the first one. I wonder if it would help if you were to actually go onto slideshow on the top bar of your screen.
Slideshow. Where am I? Okay. Shall I try again and see what happens? All right, let's have a look.
I think if you click F5, it should take you to slideshow.
F5, yeah.
Yeah.
There we are.
That's...
Oh. I think it.
Tegryn, if you go to slideshow on the top bar there, press slideshow.
Yeah, it is there.
No, right at the top of the screen.
Okay.
Where it says animation slideshow.
Okay.
And then from the beginning. It should be a setting that says from the beginning.
Yeah. It is showing that it's doing it.
Okay.
And it's coming up as a slideshow. So to be honest, worth Ellen trying to do it.
Yeah.
If I unshare then.
Right. Screen. You've seen it. What are you seeing now?
I'm seeing the first slide.
Okay,
yeah.
Hold on.
If you go to the fourth slide, because to be honest, all the other two slides were just the text of things that were said.
Okay, that looks good to me. We could have some thumbs up, make sure everybody else is happy.
I'll just, yeah.
Okay. There we are. We'll carry on. There, I won't go back over what I've said, but there's a nice photo of Tintern Station and Visitor Centre there, and Morvan Evan toilets, if you want to know what they look like there. So if you move on to the transport slide next. As mentioned, there has been a process of transitioning from diesel ones to electric vehicles, and this has been a feature across a number of designated landscapes. One of the problems designated landscapes are facing is obviously the lack of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which makes it challenging, and therefore some have decided to move initially to hybrid vehicles while building up their charging infrastructure. There's also the issue of the availability of vehicles. Initial assessment by AONB has shown that the Warden service highest carbon footprint comes from the use of diesel vans and 4x4 pickups. Therefore, they have purchased 2 new hybrid 4x4s to trial in the north and south of the park and look to move to fully electric vehicles when suitable vehicles are available. As mentioned, a clear barrier to the transition to electric vehicles is a lack of charging points, and it's very challenging in areas such as ours. A total of 80 electric vehicle charging points are being installed in the first 2 years of SLSP projects, Most designated landscapes have installed charging points to support their own work, while there are also examples of charging points being installed in public car parks. The largest project has been run in Pembrokeshire, where the National Park Authority has worked with the local county council to install charging points at 13 of its paid car parks in all its offices and depots, along with key sites just outside the national park, linked to some of the port infrastructure where visitors come and to the county and the national park. While much work needs to be undertaken to provide a viable charging network that will give confidence for people to move over to electric vehicles, SLSP has provided the 8 designated landscapes with an opportunity of contributing to this agenda. While most of the projects have focused on cars, Eryri MPA have installed a cycle charging point at Betws-y-Coed to develop an electric bike route from Bethesda to Conwy in partnership with the Owen Partnership and the Conwy Council. If we move to the next slide now then. Diolch. The environment and land in some of the designated landscapes lend themselves to carbon sequestration projects. The Brecon Beacons MPA have run a project to repair eroded blanket bog along with woodland projects, while the Pembrokeshire Coast MPA owns very little land and therefore less than 2% of the national park, and therefore has purchased land at Tegryn to pilot a carbon sequestration and nature recovery projects. So both of these and others are long-term projects which we will be monitoring and hopefully feeding information in on and lessons learned to the rest of the partnership and others as we move forward. The next slide then. While much of SLSP funding has been focused on the internal operations of designated landscapes, there's a recognition that on agendas such as decarbonisation, we need to work with partners and the wider community. Pembrokeshire Coast MPA has changed the criteria of its Sustainable Development Fund to make it focused on tackling the challenges of climate change. Through support from SLSP Fund, decarbonisation projects have been undertaken, such as the Renewable Energy Project at Crymych Rugby Club and vermicomposting at Clynview Care Farm. During the second round of funding, Pembrokeshire Coast are piloting a project with a small number of farms to green agriculture, while Eryri MPA are using their Cronfa Cymunedol Eryri to support community decarbonisation projects. Looking to the future then, while all designated landscapes have benefited from SLSP funding, sometimes the timescales were pretty tight, and therefore to enable better planning for any future funding, 2 pieces of collaborative research and support have been commissioned. The first has been to commission 2 companies, Aquaterra and Efallen, to work with the designated landscapes to assist us in implementing the new Welsh Government carbon calculator, and also to provide advice and guidance and ideas to develop a route map to become carbon neutral organisations by 2030. While the second is a carbon baseline study of the designated landscapes themselves, which is being undertaken by Small World Consulting in the University of Lancaster. These reports then will give us a guide for discussion and hopefully develop joint projects to take the designated landscapes further on our decarbonisation journey in the future. Diolch yn fawr, and happy to take any questions or any comments.
Diolch, Tegryn. Yeah, just to let attendees know, if you would like to ask a question, please pose it in the chat or the Q&A function. And if you want to ask in person, let me know and I can just alter the settings so that you'll be able to ask a question directly. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr iawn I Tegryn. Thank you very much, Tegryn, for that presentation. I hope you found it informative and interesting. Clearly, lots has been done by the designated landscapes to decarbonise our operations and activities within a fairly short space of time with the help of the SLP grant, for which we are very thankful to Welsh Government. Speaking from an AONB perspective, the projects have also acted as primer for further projects within local authorities, I think. So that's another good thing that's come out of the grant scheme. So, are there any questions for Tegryn or myself or any other member of the designated landscapes team? I'm looking at the Q&A. I can't see anything there as yet.
If I could be cheeky, Bleddyn, and jump in with a question if we're waiting for some others. So the projects around the electric charging points, it's not something we've been involved in on Gower, because there's a programme of the council installing those across the county anyhow. But I'd be interested to know if there's any issues around data and connectivity with those units. Do they need to be in communication, to enable them to work? And is that one of mobile data or internet connectivity some way? Just bearing in mind, a lot of our protected landscapes do have issues of not spots and communication generally. Thank you.
Do you want me to take that one? I noticed also that David Archer's asked a question in the Q&A, so we'll come to that one next, possibly. In terms of that, Chris, I'm not aware of any. Just giving an example of what's happened in Pembrokeshire, we're aware that we'd worked previously with the county council to install a small number of points. I think we are all part of a Southwest Wales approach to this, which actually might extend to Swansea. There, and there's an agreement there for the local authorities and the public sector there to use common charging points. Therefore, rather than having charging points and different companies dealing with various options, trying to make it as easy as possible. Certainly, I've not been aware of any data or connectivity issues to date. And as mentioned, we've taken the points to all our car parks or paid car parks really there. I sort of tend to think the partnership approach is the right approach. It tends to remind me a bit of, not that from the 19th century when the railways were developed and had different gauges. It seems as if there was a common approach towards a charging infrastructure that would be in everybody's benefit. But certainly we've benefited from that partnership, and obviously if there's an opportunity in the future, we look to do more.
Yeah, diolch, Tegryn. There's a question from David Archer, as you pointed out. David's asking, how are the funded projects selected and prioritised? I'm not sure if that's directed towards us or Welsh Government. From our point of view, we did have some consultation internally and with the Joint Advisory Committee of the AONB to come up with some suitable projects, and then we put them forward to Welsh Government and got a response back. I don't know if somebody else wants to contribute to that one.
Well, from Eryri's point of view, we were consulting with members, and then we were writing bids, and there was a panel then between all 8 landscapes where we were trying to ensure that the best value was added to each plan. So some plans were sent back to the landscapes in order to improve the output, if you like, to the public. And the quite a straightforward process, really, but quite lengthy, considering we had to complete everything within the financial year. Yes, thank you for that, Emyr.
Have any of the projects involved wind power or solar panels in rural locations? Well, from our perspective, Tegryn did mention the toilet refurbishment at Morven Evan, and we did install solar panels on the toilets there to reduce the running costs of the toilets and decarbonise that part of our estate. I'm not aware of any wind powered projects, but somebody maybe can put me to right on that one.
Yeah, I think you're correct there, Bled. The only one I would say, Steve, is that I think we are very conscious that all projects need to meet whatever statutory regulatory guidance there. So, you know, that would be a key part of our assessments moving forward there. So I noticed that I think Andrew and Paul have got their hands up, so I'm not sure if they've got something to say on this one.
Yes, if I just come in from the Wye Valley AONB's perspective, Tegryn was talking about installation of EV charge points. We're putting them in at the AONB office for operational use, and at Tintern Old Station, as mentioned, for public use. The challenge we've had is actually the capacity of the electricity supply. So it's getting Western Power to put in a viable three-phase supply to those locations. So it's that has been the challenge as much as anything. So it's not mobile connectivity or data connectivity, it's actual physical supply. And I'm sure in the remote locations, sort of remote car parks, that's quite a challenge. But yeah, I think that is the main challenge rather than anything else. Thank you.
And just to add, so the point about have we taken any steps to install solar panels on different buildings? Yes, we've used previous Welsh Government funding under the Green Growth Fund to install photovoltaics on a number of our buildings, and also we've installed a number of EV charging points at our locations as well. And way back we went for a micro hydro scheme in the park. I think the issue we all need to bear in mind, however, is this is all taking so long. We first went for our first hydro scheme, gosh, 7 or 8 years ago. And now it's only all beginning to happen now, right at this kind of brinkmanship end of the timetable. But the world's not been aware of these things for a while.
Diolch. I can't see any further questions in the Q&A. Does anybody else want to make a contribution?
If I can just chip in again at Old Station Tintern, we've got 2 railway carriages that form part of the visitor centre, and we're installing actual PV film panels or photovoltaic panels rather than sort of fixed rigid ones. So it'll be quite experimental, covering the tops of the railway carriages to see how that works, and also installing heat pumps on the to heat the carriages. So a range of technologies there. Thank you.
Andrew.
I think there's a pool of knowledge. I think, Tegryn, we're sort of looking at sort of expanding our EV charging points. We've done that in one country park, and I'll come to that later on. But I think it's the sort of the beauty really of the 8 designated landscapes working together is this pool of knowledge and a database really of the challenges and the sort of how you sort of get everything started. So I'll be certainly picking your brain some point, Tegryn, to see how you sort of rolled it out in Pembrokeshire. And I think that good practice, best practice, and sharing good practice is beneficial to all of us, I think. Thank you.
Diolch, Alun. There's a question coming from Peter Burgess. It might be more suitable for the theme on sustainable tourism, but I'll just read it out. how best to engage with and inform not only visitors but residents to pressures caused by increased visitor numbers, parking, rough camping, litter, damage to habitats, keeping to paths, etc. So if we can maybe come back to that one, Ruth, if you can kind of keep notes of it, come back to that one, I think.
Yeah, diolch Bleddyn. I'll make a note of that and we can pose that question to the panel later on. Great. Okay. If there's nothing else then for the partners on this theme, we'll move on to our next presenter, Paul Sinnadurai from Brecon Beacons National Park Authority, and Q&A will be facilitated by Andrew Blake from Wye Valley AONB. So over to you.
I think you're on mute, Paul.
Yeah, bore da chi pawb, diolch yn fawr. I'm going to share my screen. Share. And then go to presentation. Can you all see that? Is it coming through? Great. Okay, so nature-based solutions. A quick whiz through this this topic. Just to say that it is in the Welsh Government's natural resources policy, so it is a policy decision at a national level to work with nature in order to find solutions. And just to give you an indication of where this has come from, so the IUCN has defined it this way. I will read this out because it's worth taking this in. The nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively to provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So I've made those emphases. It's about human well-being and biodiversity. So this is about coming together, placing the natural world at the heart of everything we do. And if any of you watched the program on Sunday night presenting the winners of the world's first Earthshot Prize, you'll see that the Republic of Costa Rica was awarded the Earthshot Prize for its approach to nature, because what they are trying to do there is place nature at the heart of their economy and people's ways of life. So on that basis, they are underpinned by benefits that flow from healthy ecosystems and target major challenges like climate change, disaster risk reduction, food and water security, health, and are critical to economic development. Again, worth reading that out and worth emphasizing it. Benefits that flow from healthy ecosystems. Now, there's a learning curve for us all to go on there, because we've all got to become ecologists. Easy for people like me, but we've all got to become ecologists. We've all got to start thinking ecologically. And I'm very glad to say, and I've been an ecologist who's kind of been looking over my shoulder throughout most of the 30 years of my career, hoping to be taken seriously at some point. And it's kind of worrying, but also encouraging that now we've come to this critical juncture in human history. Now ecologists are going to be taken seriously. And we've kind of been saying these things throughout my career. So it's kind of not before time, I have to say. Just to emphasize that the point that this is an international thing, nature-based solutions are being taken up globally. So the IUCN has issued its guidance on what nature-based solutions are. The World Bank is funding nature-based solutions globally, especially in the developing world. And the Food and Agriculture Organization is working with farmers and other agribusinesses, again, usually in the developing world, but it's something we need to start thinking about here in Wales as well, certainly through the Sustainable Farming Scheme, but that won't be the silver bullet that solves all problems. So we've got to come up with other ideas as well. So just to emphasize that this isn't something that's landed from outer space. This is happening already in other parts of the world, and it's an approach that we need to adopt and build into the work we take forward. So what nature-based solutions are happening in national parks? Well, you will hopefully have seen the press releases that came out in April and also in October for this initiative, Net Zero with Nature. where the National Parks UK are working in partnership with the Palladium Group, basically to create these kind of natural resource accounting packages of nature restoration projects that can then be taken to the corporate and investment sector to seek funding for national park authorities to deliver kind of landscape scale nature recovery projects at scale that also provide a solution to reducing carbon emissions as well. So the most obvious examples are peatland restoration type projects and treescape projects where we're planting more trees into the landscape or facilitating natural regeneration and so on. And to bring that down to the Welsh level through the Sustainable Landscape, Sustainable Places project. So the projects that we've identified are listed on these two slides. This one, so these two slides, I couldn't fit them all in on one slide without it getting too small to read properly. So in the Brecon Beacons National Park, I've just listed these alphabetically, by the way. So we have 4 projects there: resilient uplands, quality upland access, which I can provide more information about if there's time. I've got the information obviously for the Brecon Beacons to go into in detail, and I can rely on my colleagues from the other designated landscapes to fill in the spaces on the projects there as well. Peatlands one, resilient uplands or peatlands, climate resilient treescapes, different aspects of tree management and resilient wardening. And as you can see, there is an agriculture pilot in Pembrokeshire Coast, community woodland project as well. And in the Snowdonia conservation areas fit for the 21st century, so landscape scale project, ancient woodland projects as well. And in the Gower, Fairwood Common and Clean Valley Country Park are benefiting from this approach as well. And in the Llŷn, the Llŷn, the sort of footpath improvements and access improvements in the Wye Valley. So you might think, oh, what are access improvements and footpath improvements to do with nature-based solutions? Well, that's something we certainly take very seriously here, because any of our upland path projects where we're restoring upland paths, we're usually trying to restore habitat at scale as well, because it's footpath erosion and trampling and human disturbance from just walking and dogs, and unfortunately increasingly sort of illegal use of off-road vehicles on the uplands and commons as well is something that we're grappling with all the time as well. Just to kind of finish the presentation quickly, I want to kind of just emphasize why this is so important, why we need nature-based solutions. If anyone has been following the World Scientists' Warning to Humanity, which they published first in 1992, and then 25 years later, they published an update to this in 2017. These 9 graphs summarize what they've been warning about. So the top left-hand graph very simply is showing how we did manage globally to reduce the ozone, solve the hole in the ozone layer. We clubbed together globally and we sorted it out. So it's just an illustration of what we can do if we put our minds to things. Then the middle top graph is the freshwater resources per capita, 1,000 cubic meters per people, and you can see that there's less fresh water per person than there used to be, and it's declining quite drastically. And in my mind, fresh water is going to be the next major crisis that we're dealing with globally. Reconstructed marine catch per year, basically that's showing that we did see some recovery in marine fish stocks, but they're on the decline again. The middle left-hand graph, dead zones. This is basically the number of areas where there's no kind of functional ecosystem anymore. They're increasing. The middle graph is total forests in terms of billion hectares, and we know that's on the slide, and that's a dramatic decline. And we know on the middle right-hand graph is illustrating the decline in vertebrate species abundance since using the 1970s as a baseline. The bottom left-hand graph, we're familiar with that one. That's the increase in carbon dioxide emissions. And the middle bottom graph, we're familiar with that one. That's the global annual average temperature range increasing. And the bottom right-hand one is the increase in human population, and what tends to go with that is ruminant livestock increases as well, as everyone wants to start eating more red meat. And that reminds me of the equation that we should all be familiar with. Environmental impact equals population size multiplied by affluence multiplied by technology. As we get cleverer, it inevitably means that our population size increases and we have a bigger environmental impact on the world, which is kind of ironic because it should be heading in the other way in terms of impact. And again, this is just to ram home these reminders again why nature-based solutions are so important. We can see that statement says it all. I've just blown it up so you can see it properly. Population size of mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles, so all vertebrates, have seen an alarming average drop-off of nearly 70% since 1970. And why are we losing nature? Well, because we used to make this assumption that, oh, we just need to find more evidence before we do something about it. Well, we can't make that excuse anymore. We know what's happening. We have the solutions to solve things. We have the evidence to know that we are the cause of what's going wrong. So we're responsible for putting things right. So we have to come up with these nature-based solutions. And we're drilling that down to a local level. Looking at, we rely increasingly on the state of nature reports. So we have these available as well to kind of drill down that kind of international picture to know what is going on nationally at a Welsh level, and we can produce nice nifty graphics like this and infographics to help us understand that in very short time. And WWF has gone even further and told us what the causes are for the decline in nature as well. No surprises there. All those things are familiar to us all now. So no one gets left out. Every sector is responsible. And finally, we have ways of solving these. So this is just a picture of the front cover of the Nature Recovery Action Plan for the Brecon Beacons National Park. Regional and local nature recovery action plans are a way of delivering the National Nature Recovery Action Plan at a local level. So I think that's my presentation completed. So I'll stop sharing now and I'll come back to the full screen. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. Really well, eloquent and inspiring or terrifying, whichever in equal measure, really. Yeah, great presentation. Yeah, for our part in the Wye Valley AONB, similar initiatives, as Paul said, we've been doing some access improvements, and that is actually using natural flood management processes, so or interventions on paths to intercept and prevent water erosion, which of course again is critical with climate change and increased storm events, and preventing more severe erosion of the green infrastructure and the access network. So that's one of the examples that that we've been doing in the Wye Valley. We're also working on our nature network and nature recovery network mapping. We're not quite as advanced as the Brecon Beacons in taking that through to a full plan, but and again, many of the other AONBs and national parks are working on similar proposals and plans. So I can see there aren't many questions yet in the Q&A. I noticed that there was a question in the chat about how are we promoting these issues to the public and yeah, best promoting them. I mean, every designated landscape organisation engages in public promotion, so through social media, through newsletters, and in the good old days when we could get people into village halls or yeah, lead guided walks and things like that. You know, there was a broad spectrum of information and publications and so on and so forth. But inevitably with those sorts of activities, you end up preaching to the converted or to the interested at least, And it's always a challenge of, you know, how do we get to the people in Newport or Bangor or you know, into the city centres and town centres. How do we get the message across? And it's obviously for the designated landscape organisations, it's a real stretch on resources to do that effectively, but we can work in partnership with with the local authorities and the public sector and NGO sector to get that engagement. But it is always a real challenge. Paul, you want to come in there?
Yeah, just on that very thing, I tend to rehearse that same conversation with colleagues, and we were just discussing this morning. Some of us will remember the local biodiversity action plans that we all valiantly tried to kind of roll out at the end of the 90s and kind of early mid-noughties. And we found that they just weren't really getting any traction because the way they were designed was a kind of like a top-down, let's kind of put targets down and hope we can implement them kind of approach. And what we knew all along was that, no, what we've got to try and do is get traction within communities, within households, to help people understand how they can despairing or hopeless about this, but how they can actually get involved and be part of the decision-making process. And I think this time around, through the Nature Recovery Action Planning process, that's what we're going to try and do. We have a place planning approach in Wales. We have it, we're implementing it here quite strongly. And we know that there's also the local places for nature grants and those kind of things that can start to show people how they can find solutions to bring in nature back in their areas, how they can make their areas richer. And you can see how it bleeds across into kind of related areas like local food growth, or establishing new orchards, or beginning to bring community if you like, sharecropping into local woodland management and so on. And those are kind of nature-based solutions. They're not necessarily for nature, but they are solutions to help people improve their quality of life. But you're quite right. The resources required to do that, are quite considerable, because it's the same sort of resource commitment that you need when you're kind of supporting volunteers. You've got to be there, in order to provide solutions and provide answers. And that's a big commitment for small organisations.
Yeah, I'm glad to say the questions have come pouring in now. I'm not a competent Welsh reader or speaker, so would somebody be willing and able to translate John Harold's question in the Q&A?
Mae'r cwestiwn ydy I fi, sef conservation areas for the 21st century.
Yes, the 21st century conservation is one for me. What this is a process that officers go through to see what the situation is. It's quite a complex matrix, and we will be consulting in a broader sense on that. One thing we have learned as an authority during recent years, if you haven't got a clear strategy and the direction in which you're going and what you want to do, then it's very difficult to find support and resources to do it. We started the process in Snowdonia to see what kind of habitats we want to see.
Excellent, thank you for that. Then there was a question on what are people's views over the obsession with tree planting and how this may or may not actually achieve nature recovery. Certainly for us in the Wye Valley, where the average for the whole of the AONB is about 27% tree cover, which I think is pretty much the aspiration for everywhere else in the country, and parts of our landscapes are got 40% or more tree cover. We're certainly concerned about the drive for for tree planting where that may be directed to other important habitats like permanent grassland or species-rich grassland, things like that. But obviously the right tree in the right place is definitely a focus, and the increasing hedgerow trees and things like that would be our focus in the Wye Valley. But others, panel members, Howard, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, basically, from my point of view, because I'm within an authority who are actively pursuing purchasing land to actually do tree planting, it's been really difficult because we also have quite a few farmers on the council. They don't want you to plant on grade 1, grade 2 agricultural land, so that rules that out. You're then not planting on floodplains, and then when you come to our area of outstanding natural beauty, it's an upland area of outstanding natural beauty, so we don't want to plant on Freeth, we don't want to plant on moorland. So, you know, I think you're right. I think we ought to be looking at the value of each of the habitat types and sort of assessing how we can put them into best condition, rather than the sort of, you're right, it feels like a sort of obsession. But I think, you know, in the perception of the public, it's easy to think you are solving things by going out and planting trees. We've just recently had an offer of £3,000 worth of trees per annum from a PLC. And to be honest, we couldn't really deal with it because we didn't have the land to plant the trees on anyway. So, you know, my theory about tree planting is, you know, anyone who wants to do it should really sort of be able to either go out and purchase the right land to plant trees on, or have existing land within their portfolio. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Chris?
Yeah, Andrew. From the perspective on Gower, yeah, we would welcome some more tree planting. You know, there is capacity to do that, still sensitive to the landscape. I think what we need to make sure is it does have all the right benefits across things. So, you know, if we think about, you know, some of the more vulnerable species on Gower, greater horseshoe bats, lesser horseshoe bats, very much dependent on the landscape character, which is around a network of small fields surrounded by hedgerows and shelter belts, and that's very much the sort of planting that we would love to encourage on Gower. The issues, I think, are around the fact that we need to plan the tree planting in for the long term. Obviously, if we want the benefits, whether that's carbon sequestration or the landscape benefits or benefits to wildlife, it needs to be done in a planned way and for the long term. And one of the issues, I think, in terms of generating more tree planting is the actual the capacity of either ourselves as organisations or the private sector in actually delivering nursery stock for the amount of tree planting that we'd be looking at. And secondly, obviously, from our perspective, we don't, we as an AONB don't really own an awful lot of land in the AONB, so much of the benefits and much of the potential lies with the landowners, and we really need to encourage them to approach it in a sensitive way that has the maximum benefits for us all. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. I mean, the first point I'd say is we have to be careful not to be misanthropic. People in the public are, very frightened to the point of being terrified about what's happening in the world, and there is a lot of uncertainty, and people want to see some sort of solution. So we have to be careful and tread lightly when we criticize the public's kind of reaction to wanting to see trees planted. We have to understand where it's coming from, even if we're uncertain and unsure about whether it's the best thing to do. So we're having a very, very active debate here with the Local Nature Partnership and around the consultation on the National Park Management Plan about trees. I like to call them treescapes rather than woodlands. It seems to me to be a better term. It was a term adopted by the Natural Environment Research Council when it launched its treescapes research proposal last year. You know, I'd like to see kind of more with sort of wood pasture as a kind of a viable landscape option, because that permits pasture to continue. It provides browsable forage, and it provides a kind of recyclable crop, because we can introduce a pollarding system with that sort of landscape as well. So you can see how the benefits start to play, and you can see how the green industry starts to play in that sort of landscape as well. Well, I think we're like quite a few places. We don't know quite what the tree cover. I'm very impressed that the Wye Valley knows what your tree cover is, because we're at 6s and 7s at that. With that, we've had we think it's about 16%, but we think it might be more than that. We don't have up-to-date grass teal woodland tree planting data available. We put a request into Welsh Government to have that data sent to us on a regular basis, and to be redacted, so it doesn't need to tell us who any of the landowners are. But I had, just an inquiry yesterday from a member of the public who's bought some land, wants to stick trees on it, and wants to kind of see ecological restoration. So I sent back an email to her saying everything that's going on, and I found I'd written an essay, because there is so much happening around woodland planting. Sustainable, Stump Up for Trees has kicked off. Several private estates are looking at, well, frankly, kind of rewilding options for their private estates. There are some peculiar projects out there. I ask everyone to go and look this one up. One Life, One Tree. If you didn't hear about it in the press, go and look it up. We've seen 900 giant sequoias planted just outside Brecon. Not something we're very happy with, but we couldn't do anything about it because it's a private scheme on private land, and it's up to Natural Resources Wales to regulate that one. And the same project is in the process of planting something like 600 giant sequoias close to Abergavenny as well. So, make of that what you will. We're doing things like, managing, controlling and felling trees infected with ash dieback, because we've got to come up with a solution for that. We've just launched our own Veteran Trees initiative, and we're very supportive of NRW in its concern about afforested peatlands. We'd like to see the afforested peatlands deforested and those peatlands restored wherever possible, but that's an internal situation for NRW to resolve. And it was interesting to hear from Howard that you'd be looking to avoid the freed areas, or the Coedkai areas, as we call them here. We'd be looking to see that kind of wood pasture habitat restored. So you get that kind of serial succession from the valley floor up through the sides onto the more open, naturally treeless uplands above the natural tree line. And certainly we see where bracken is extensive. That gives that's an obvious place where trees would once have grown, because bracken was an understory plant of a kind of wood pasture landscape. So there's plenty to play for, but I can't say we have a definitive answer as to quite what is the right thing to do. The thing I would be concerned about is where people decide they want to plant trees on their land. Yeah, great. But it becomes a bit of a lottery then, doesn't it? Because this whole thing about the right tree in the right place. Well, we're never going to get that. We're going to get trees being planted where people want to plant them. And even though we produce our ecological network mapping, we hope we'll be able to use that to try and kind of put some thoughts in people's heads about where best they can recover tree-rich landscapes using that kind of mapping approach. But it won't always be possible. People will want to do things that they want to do where they want to do them.
Thanks, Paul, for that. There's a couple of other tree-related questions which I'll try and wrap up. One was when will designated landscapes and everyone else stop using plastic tree guards? There's a very good report I've seen. It was still draft, but by the Woodland Trust on evaluating the non-plastic tree guards, and unfortunately, not all of them were very robust, but it's obviously a management issue around if you've got deer browsing or rabbit browsing, or what the tree guard is guarding against, really. But it is there are alternatives. Some of them aren't very robust, but no doubt the technology and the will improve. There was another one, sorry, just scrolling down through. Oh, how do you get farmers to grow more standard trees in their hedgerows? I mean, it's obviously partly an incentivization, but also, we have on the English side of the Y, a fantastic estate where they are a traditional estate, long-standing, landed gentry that are able to invest in the long term and see the benefit, and they're putting in hedgerow trees everywhere they can because they see the benefit. And we also have duchy land, again, putting in avenues where people are looking long term. I think they're taking those right approaches. The challenge is if a farmer's on a 5-year farm business tenancy, he's got no incentive to do anything beneficial to the hedges at all. So that's where the incentives need to come in. Moving on, in the questions, there was a question about the 30 by 30 target, which and the inclusion of designated landscapes as, in a sense, the answer to the 30 by 30 target, certainly UK wide, is that providing a catalyst for nature recovery in the designated landscapes, and are there any changes we'd like to see to facilitate this? I mean, I from my perspective, we're not seeing the huge surge in resources that are needed to deliver that yet, but as we've been discussing, obviously, nature-based solutions and focus on nature recovery, is being recognised and is being acted upon, but it needs more concerted effort and more resources, both direct into the designated landscape organisations, but obviously primarily into the landscape and the farmers and landowners, land managers, to make those changes for nature recovery, and then we really could be seeing that that connectivity and that consolidation that would deliver the 30 by 30 target. So I think, as with everything at the moment in decarbonisation, addressing the climate and ecological emergency, we really need to make a step change in delivering on those. But I don't think it's wrong to include the national parks and AONBs, but we are to a certain extent hampered by our own lack of land ownership and direct influence over some of the activities that go on in the parks and AONBs. If there's no hands up from the panel on that, I will move on to one for me on Riverside, and so the phosphate issue in the Y and also the Usk, and actually in several many of the rivers, and what is our views and engagement on that? I mean, throughout Powys into Herefordshire and to Monmouthshire, we're dealing with this dire emergency on the river, and it's a broad issue that needs addressing across the spectrum of agriculture, sewage, so land use, land management, down to the large number of failing Victorian domestic sewerage systems through to the agro-industrial production epitomised by like poultry units, and it needs addressing across the board. We're sort of unfortunate in the Wye Valley AONB we're at the bottom end of the river, so the vast majority of the pollution is flowing down to us, but we're doing what we can with farmers and landowners and the local communities in the AONB. But yeah, there are bigger issues that need to be addressed further upstream. I mean, I don't know, Paul, because obviously you're from the Brecon Beacons, you're also addressing similar issues in the Usk, whether you've got anything to add there, and then I'll come back to the other hands that are raised.
Thank you. Yeah, I can say we're tooling up, we're gearing up. We've recruited another planning ecologist to help us get over this hump of appropriate habitat regulations assessments and appropriate assessments that we're going to have to do for any scheme that has a potential to affect the integrity of the River Usk SAC. We are looking to work more closely with Herefordshire County Council, Monmouthshire County Council, Paris County Council. There's also, if you like, the kind of strategic approach we can start to play through developing an area-based partnership for the Usk Valley, because obviously, this is at the top of the catchment. And we're looking actively at that too. So that, there are other initiatives beginning to emerge around the Usk Valley through, for example, the Four Rivers for Life project that NRW has just received funding for four of the SAC rivers in South Wales through the European Life Fund. The RSPB is looking to develop this important curlew areas project across Wales as well. So things are beginning to coalesce. And I think the kind of solutions you come up with have to be integrated, collaborative solutions where we work our way through not just the immediate short-term consequences of phosphate pollution, but the legacy phosphate within the landscape as well. Because goodness knows how long the trail for that is going to be is going to continue. But we can only deal with that through integrated solutions rather than just kind of one hit, so to speak.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Howard, you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to make the point about ash dieback, that there's a massive amount of money being spent on monitoring, checking ash, loss of ash, and at the moment there doesn't seem to be the mitigation, which sort of part of that is part of the solution could be those hedgerow trees that you were talking about. We're going to lose a lot of big hedgerow trees through ash dieback. SACs are going to be hit by it at the moment. NRW are looking at alternative tree planting to where you lose, big sectors of ash dieback. I was going to agree with Paul as well that wood pasture seems to be coming very much onto the radar of tree planting. And I sort of feel as though the Freeth is a sort of mixture of that potential sort of rowan, dotted, isolated in amongst the bracken, which is, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we're seeing natural regeneration in our bracken on the lower slopes of Moor Vamai, which is common. The sheep are avoiding it. The rowan and other smaller trees are coming into it, so that's good. But also one of the solutions of that sort of more sporadic tree planting is to natural flood management. Our sort of teams who are operating on the Clwyd catchment are monitoring the water, and I think we will see in the future as we run forward that sort of those what I would call clough woodlands will be the areas that we will concentrate on in sort of looking at that for typical characteristics of upland woodland and favoured habitats of birds like the ringoozle. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of ash dieback in the Wye and the Wye Valley Woodlands SAC, we're seeing significant impact. Ash being a significant constituent of that native woodland. Yeah, I think we'll have to learn to love sycamore, among other things. But yeah, Alan, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think just coming back to your river quality, we've got nothing compared to the Y up in Anglesey, but we had a small river that comes to the Cemmaes Bay into the beach, through the beach, North Anglesey. Water quality was an issue there in terms of beach quality, and it was poor and it failed sort of in that category. Working with a farmer upstream, right upstream, a dairy farmer, we noticed, the phosphates, nitrates, bacteria, etc., getting into the river. So a collaboration really between Community Council, Welsh Water, Swansea University, NFU, Sustainable Development Funding from Welsh Government, improved that sort of way we where the farmer farms his land, basically by fencing off the river completely. So there's no access for the cattle to trample into the river. But then we part of the funding, we installed boreholes for water troughs for every field. So it's really from source really to the sea, and a collaboration all the way through. We've got all the data and information on that. So anybody who wants information about that, NFU have picked that up as good practice. So there's data there and information there. And a small river, but causing quite a bit of economic problems downstream, because people not visiting Cemmaes maybe because they think the water quality is not good enough and going to other beaches. So there's an example there of a small scale but a collaborative project.
Thanks, Alan. Yes, I mean, again, in the Wye Valley, we've been doing similar things. We're working closely with the Wye and Usk Foundation on natural flood management and land use interventions with the farms, which can be helping with guttering through to natural flood management structures in the tributaries into the Wye to hold back the water and create more wet areas and things, and it needs that comprehensive and catchment or sub-catchment approach and looking at all the opportunities, and it's not necessarily through the Sustainable Landscapes, Sustainable Places funding, but also through other schemes to bring in those interventions, and hopefully the new farming support will address that as well. Moving on, there was a question that what are the considerations for the marine environment? Well, we've got tidal stretches of the Wye. I don't feel qualified to speak on the marine environment, so I don't know whether the coastal parks and AONBs want to chip in with projects and initiatives to do with nature-based solutions and nature recovery on the marines.
Happy to come in, Andrew. Yeah, thank you, Paul, for the question. Yeah, certainly, I think it's a bit like in the terrestrial environment. It's the right solution in the right place, and certainly the marine can play a role, not necessarily through our activities, but certainly I'm aware of a seagrass project in off the coast of Dale in Pembrokeshire, which is being monitored, but early indication is that that is working pretty well and can play a contribution to a sort of blue carbon solution there. So, possibly there needs to be a look at where the suitable sites are for seagrass, kelp, or whatever the marine options there that can contribute to there. So I don't think nothing's been funded as part of the SLSP grant at the moment. And of course, the designated landscapes don't actually cross into the marine at the moment in terms of our boundaries, although we do have responsibilities as relevant authorities there. So hopefully it's one we can look at in the future.
Great, thank you for that. And lastly, Alan, quickly before we draw this to a close.
Yeah, just what Tegryn was saying there about seagrass. I know Bleddyn will say the same. They've got a project in Penllyn that's ongoing, and we've got interest in Anglesey for the seagrass project, so they're looking for suitable sites, and that looks quite interesting. I think it absorbs 5 times more carbon than trees, I believe. So it's definitely something to look out for. So we're sort of interested in that project, and again we can share that with the guests here today and everybody else.
Great, thank you, Paul. One last.
Sorry, not on Marina. How presumptuous that would be for me to do that. Just asking in general, will we have a chance? Because I know there might have been some other questions, because we can't answer all of them. It'll be useful. I'd be happy to provide written answers to those if that would be helpful for the people who've asked the questions. So I hope we'll get the chance to do that.
Yeah, I mean that would be great. I suppose that's for Chris and Ruth to coordinate. But yes, yeah, apologies, we haven't got to answer all the questions in the time available. But yeah, thank you for everyone for your contributions to an interesting and essential and broad-ranging discussion. And thank you, Paul, again for your inspiring presentation to start it off. So Chris, I guess I'll hand back to you to point us in the direction of the comfort break, I believe.
I think that is the case. I think Ruth was going to do that, but yeah, we are at the right sort of time now for comfort break. Ruth, when are you expecting us back?
Yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you for your questions as well. Yeah, we were saying a 10-minute break now, so if we could be back for about 11:30, that would be brilliant. Get a cuppa and we'll get back on with the next presentation at past. Thank you. Diolch pawb.
Thank you.
Alun Owen from Anglesey AONB and Emyr Williams from Sinnadurai National Park Authority to talk to us about sustainable tourism and their work on that theme. Diolch.
Ruth.
Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you very much for attending this morning and this afternoon session. I'm Alun Owen. I'm the Countryside and AONB officer for Isle of Anglesey County Council, and I've been tasked to report back on the sustainable tourism element of the Sustainable Landscapes, Sustainable Places funding. In terms of the sustainable tourism element of the Sustainable Landscapes, Sustainable Places, the criteria really for looking at how we sort of prepared our applications, we're looking at those 4 sort of areas: improving visitor facilities and infrastructure, helping landscapes recover from the impact of tourism, preparing for changing tourism patterns following COVID, and improving and protecting valued cultural and heritage assets. So those are the 4 really that we were sort of, any applications that were heading towards Welsh Government for assessment had to sort of meet all of those criteria. Important to note really, and this is not an exhaustive list, links really to the strategic documents, designated landscape management plans, whether they're new, emerging, the area statements, 2018 valid and resilient document, priorities really for the AONBs and national parks, the Welsh Government priorities, and the Welcome to Wales new tourism strategy for 2020-25. Sort of stating really the importance of our landscapes and saying that it's part of the offer really, the Wales office is the culture, the adventure, how the landscapes sort of contribute to that. So it's quite an important element of the tourism strategy. Again, just moving on to different sort of plans and programs, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and Public Service Board wellbeing plans, new emerging local development plans, destination management plans, and active travel plans. So really there's nothing we've been doing in isolation. They've been interlinking with all of these plans and programs, and that's quite an important link really. There's a sort of compatibility and continuity within that. I think there was numbers sort of, I think Chris mentioned that, or Ruth maybe in the beginning, sort of the numbers really, sort of how many projects that have been carried out through the 2021 and the 2021-22 period. So in the sustainable tourism, there's 44 projects, whether they've been completed or ongoing. in brackets there in 2021, you've got 6 and 8. So 6 were primarily sustainable tourism, and 8 were sort of secondary maybe, or they had a dominant project, maybe decarbonisation or nature recovery. And similarly, 30 projects in 21-22, 20 primarily on sustainable tourism, and 10 sort of contributing to that sustainable tourism element. So it might have been a stronger focus on decarbonisation or COVID recovery or nature recovery. Number of projects, the themes really were looking at access improvements, car parks and traffic management, improving infrastructure facilities, and interpretation. So that's just a general sort of rounded sort of presentation of the sort of the projects that were completed or are being completed. And there are about 18 projects improving access and recreation opportunities, including footpaths, which we mentioned before in the presentations earlier. There's also master planning for more sustainable future transport to and within the designated landscapes. 15 projects improving visitor and community amenities, such as car parks and sustainable toilets. And also there was 3 projects improving key heritage and other visitor sites. So that's a sort of a rounded sort of approach really to the number of projects and the sort of the themes that we carried through. Just some examples really of the projects. This is a bit of before and after in this case, and this is sort of something we've all seen, I think, in the press last year and this year. The amount of parking issues. This is Pen y Pass, and this project by Sinnadurai National Park is sort of the before and after really. Before the Sherpa bus booking and improvement system for the national park, and you can see there's not the lower photograph. There's not a line of sheep; it's a line of traffic parking, you know, where they shouldn't be. So that's sort of I think that's been well documented in the press. And this is sort of the improvement really with the Sherpa bus being that sort of pre-booking sort of system, and that's improved sort of, you know, Emyr can tell more about this than I can, but you know, I think the system has improved certainly to what it was before. Coming down to Llŷn, they had some projects with this is sort of infrastructure environmental improvements in Prys, which is near Abersoch. So resurfacing a section of road near the beach, new steps to the picnic area, cutting back overgrowth in the picnic area, and you know, Bleddyn was saying, you know, this is representing good value for money. It was good joint working also with the Gwynedd maritime units, and also in a perverse way, because it was so quiet because of lack of people around with COVID, there was an opportunity to get the work done as well without much hindrance. Moving on to Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, interpretation here really. These are sort of discovery points. These have been well put together, I think, in terms of it's not too much writing, very graphic and very easy to follow. But they had a number of projects looking at small infrastructure projects, looking at improving access, beach access, disability access to Castell Henllys. And certainly Jessica, I think, who sent these to me yesterday, I'll be getting in contact with her because we're looking at something similar in the AONB, some of these interpretation panels and the sort of style as well. So this is something we're looking at. So yes, just an example there of interpretation really, and sort of giving people the information where, you know, what can be done, and just enough information, I think, to share with the public. This is one of our projects. This is Breakwater Country Park in Holyhead. It's multi-designated. It's the highest point is on the right-hand side there, Mynydd Tŵr, Holyhead Mountain. It's AONB, it's Heritage Coast, it's SAC, it's SPA, it's Riggs site, and the sort of the country park area is just here. So this is a sort of a gateway really. One of the main gateways to North Stack and South Stack, and ex-quarry for building the foundation for the actual breakwater, and then there was brickworks there after that. Part of the Wales Coast Path, you can see snaking along here, it takes you to North Stack and then South Stack. One of the projects that we did in terms of the sustainable tourism project, and it fitted into the criteria of improving visitor facilities and infrastructure, was a play area in the country park, something that was lacking over the years. A lot of families come over there. They didn't spend an awful lot of time there possibly because there wasn't much to do for the children. So this was an investment through SLSP and another fund, SDF Capital, a couple of years ago. 150,000 investment here, but we've got different play areas for the smaller ones. A bit more of a challenge here for the more active or older ones. So there's an adventure, there's a bit of risk in there, there's a bit of, there's just different sort of facilities here. So what we found, interestingly, that the turnover in our cafe, we've got 2 cafes, there's a wildlife kiosk here, wildlife trust kiosk here, and just around the corner there's another cafe. This has been closed, unfortunately, due to COVID, due to the staff working there sort of deciding, that they were not going to be working this year. But the turnover in the cafes increased immensely, and that's attributed to the park area, because we've had stories of parents with their children going into the cafe and the children being very impatient, say, look, come on, let's go back to the cafe area. But there's definitely a marked increase in turnover in the cafe. Definitely a marked increase in turnover of the parking. We've got a paid display machine in the country park. We've had that for about 10 years. And our figures in September, open at the end of August, figures in September and October have been much better than the years we've had in the past. So there's a higher income there, and it's become sort of a destination within a destination. So dwell times increase. There's that sort of being outdoors. There's a social interaction, with the children, but also from a distance, social interaction with other parents and relatives. So that's been a good thing. One of the things that hasn't worked quite well, really, is we found is the littering. That's one thing that has become a bit of a problem. So we're sort of realigning our sort of littering and recycling sort of issue, just to sort of combat that sort of litter. It's not too bad, but it's just something that we need to sort of keep on top of. This just shows you the play area sort of more ground level. You've got the backdrop there of one of the cliffs. This one just shows you bank holiday. This was when this was the first bank holiday when it opened. So this is the other cafe over here. This is the amount of people there, very, very busy. This gives you an overview. This is the play area, but this is sort of just coming back to some of the other projects that were discussed this morning. We've got 2 EV charging points just over here. Just looking over here, this is northwest Anglesey here, Carmel Head. Maybe you'll just see the ferry leaving the port there. So this is the car park is full here. We've got a paint display machine here, EV charging points, and parts of the SLSP funding for this year. We're looking at decarbonisation for the country park. So the buildings in here, with a number of buildings around the corner here as well. And also sort of a pilot on a motorhome development, maybe 3 to 5 sort of with EV charging points. So we're looking at that as part of the project. So a combination really of sustainable tourism and also with the decarbonisation. It's just a whiz through, and this is sort of just prompting or priming for the questions and answer session, really, the challenges and opportunities, the successes and investment and collaboration and partnerships. The challenges, certainly with tourism for Anglesey, and I'm sure every other area are different. The coastal ones sort of have had a bit of a hammering, possibly because of the people deciding to sort of holiday in Wales. Different challenges for different locations, we believe, but there are opportunities as well within these challenges. And I think this is where the designated landscape, the national designation and partnership and partners come together to sort of work together. And this is where the collaboration and partnerships at the end sort of comes in. Successes, I think we need to, there's a lot of focus on, sort of failure and a lot of, sensational in the news and on social media. I think we need to celebrate our successes a bit more and be a bit more sort of, a bit more assertive in the way we sort of, promote our successes. And investment, of course, it's about, yes, it's about sort of infrastructure, it's about more funding, but also investing in people as well in that hospitality trade of sustainable tourism and making that a career, possibly not just a job, but looking at that as a career, a future career in Wales. And I think that's important. And the collaboration and partnerships is just something, it's said a lot, we need to collaborate and be more in partnership. But I think we need to sort of get into more of that spirit of that. And from what I've heard this morning and reading through some of the projects, there's a lot of information in there and a lot of data where Ruth and Ellen have possibly been number crunching and putting things together to look at these sort of projects and how we can learn good practice, best practice, learning from each other. And I'm going to pass over now to Emyr, who's going to host the question and answer session. So that's just a quick run over of some of the projects in the sustainable tourism category. Thank you.
Alun, Wastad yn werthfawr I weld esiamplau.
Thank you, Alun. It's always good to see images and examples, and we've all got a bit of history with sustainable tourism. Before I open for questions, we are, as landscapes, are on a journey with all of these 4 themes, and as it happens, Eryri was 70 yesterday, Snowdonia was 70, so we've had a period of reflection. And as far as tourism or amenities concerned in Snowdonia, we had to put infrastructure in to begin with. There were no toilets, no car parks, nowhere to camp, nowhere to eat. So the area has moved on quite a bit since then. Wind on another 20 years, and then of course, the question arose whether there was a problem between tourism and recreation in our areas, and we've managed to find a balance we feel that's suitable for the area. But then COVID came, ruined everything, and to be honest, COVID maybe has been beneficial in a way, because we were speaking on behalf of Wales in terms of tourism. But what COVID did was it deepened the people's appreciation of these areas. But also there were cracks there, and cracks with tourism have now been opened wide, and there's an opportunity to develop this. And discussions have began on a national level on the type of tourism that's suitable for Wales and for the national parks and areas of natural beauty. So I think it's important that we remind ourselves of the context where we come from and the journey. So we may be in a difficult place at the moment, but the journey is important. Right, do we have any questions posted on the Q&A chat? I think there's one. From earlier on, possibly. From Peter Burgess regarding parking, rough camping, littering and damage to habitats. I'll quickly go through this, and hopefully others will chip in with their experience as well. In terms of parking, we are challenged across all the landscapes. Our position in Snowdonia is that the infrastructure we have has been designed 50 years ago. It's done well, but now we need to sit down and move on and provide something for the next 50 years. We have commissioned reports and we're working through these with our partners. And one thing that's for sure, there's no more room to park cars in the popular places in the national park. So we need to look at public transport or a different kind of transport to get people into these areas. Rough camping, well, that social problem. You only have to look at people's mindsets having changed. You look at Glastonbury, Leeds Festival this year, people just coming there and they're in the festival mode. And what we found in Snowdonia is that people are in festival mode coming into the national parks rather than just coming here to enjoy our peace, tranquility and beauty. Littering is always a problem, and we have a vast amount of volunteers helping us, and we're very thankful for that, of course, and habitats. And this is why we as landscapes are investing so much in footpaths to keep people onto a narrow piece of land, and that protects the habitats. And we did commission a report as a national park on the impact of lockdown upon nature. And it was very encouraging that the birds and plants had moved. Some had even actually nested on some of the paths because I can't see any hands up. Does anyone want to add anything to those 4 themes? No? Right. With parking, what we've seen happening lately is that people find isolated places in Llŷn Peninsula and go there and crowd there, whereas a year or 2 ago they didn't have that information. So So that's changed, and cars are going to these places and creating problems. It's not really suitable to provide parking facilities in those places. So that is becoming a challenge. So we are trying to improve facilities in the more convenient places and direct people to those places. Thank you, Chris.
Diolch. Yeah, I'd echo you. On Gower, we've got similar problems, and I think the car parking and the rough camping are interconnected in that that you get the rough camping issues where there is parking in informal parking, and we have seen those informal parking areas where they're in private ownership. They are actually now being withdrawn as parking areas because of the associated problems.
Right. As a panel, sure.
Does anyone else from the panel want to report on how you cope? Alun.
Yeah, I think also we've noticed in the last couple of years since COVID, more visitors to the area, but also it's about behaviour and attitude and lack of respect. Generally, sort of verbally, or sort of just there's suddenly more littering and everything else. I think that's something that's quite stark. There's some staff have really sort of picked up on. Really, sort of is the abuse they've been having. Whether it's beach wardens or whether it's sort of parking attendants. So that's something I think that's we're looking at internally. Certainly, it's about sort of training staff. Of course, it is, but it's something that's been on the increase. Just another thing about the parking issue and sort of camper vans and wild camping. We had an incident, or not an incident, but we had a lot of problems near Area Valley in Emyr, where people were just parking their caravans and camping there. And Area Valley were very, very concerned because of the term FOD, foreign object debris, paper, litter, getting onto the runway and getting into the jet engines, and potentially could cause an accident or a fatality somewhere in a nearby village. So again, that was a little bit of displacement. That they were moved. People moved and they moved somewhere else. And what Bleddyn was saying is quite right. I think people have been finding places that nobody's parked there before, and they sort of made that their own. So yeah, a lot of work for us certainly over the autumn winter to see how we can work with the community councils, farmers, and sort of our partners really to sort of try and improve the situation for next year.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you. I think the fascinating thing for me over the sort of the opening up after lockdown was the number of people that were obviously coming to the Wye Valley in my situation, that had never been there before, that didn't know. They were phoning up and asking things like, is your park open? Do we need to pay? Where can we go? We want to sit by the river. Can we go for a walk? And they were really basic questions that, had they had a decent look at our website, they could have found those answers, and they obviously weren't. They were either phoning up or contacting us, presumably from a Google search or something. And so the challenge for us, I think, and for all of us, was that this is a completely new audience that hadn't been visiting our designated landscapes before. And we were obviously as unprepared as everyone else, in a sense, for this influx and for engaging with, I was saying before about how we reach those sort of hard to reach groups, and suddenly they were coming to us, and we didn't have the mechanisms. The staff are partly still working from home anyway, and so we didn't have the capacity to handle them, let alone did we have the right information in the right format for these people. And it's a really interesting conundrum that we thought our tourist information, visitor information was fairly easily accessible on our website, and we gave brief descriptions of the things you could do on a couple of hours, a half a day, a whole day, a week trip to the Y, and that was not getting through. So yeah, it's one thing to have the infrastructure on the ground, right, obviously, for when people arrive, and the signage and so on and so forth. But I think the thing that really struck me was how we managed that gateway information for people wanting to leave home and go to a nice place because they can't go abroad, and they've seen in the newspapers that these national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty might be worth a visit. So yeah, we're looking now at those opportunities to revamp our visitor information and hopefully appeal to this new audience.
Howard.
Howard.
Thank you. Just a couple of things, really. Obviously, we're sitting here on the edge of Liverpool, Manchester, Chester, not far from Birmingham. So, we received exactly what Andrew has just talked about. And I think it's something John Harold had pointed out in his recent newsletter. It's a new group. It's the first time we've had this group since the 1940s, this big surge of people. So we took an initial, how are we going to welcome them? And so I think that was our line. We welcomed them. And the reason we were able to welcome was because of Welsh Government's extra resourcing through COVID. So we had about 4 extra rangers out on the ground, meeting people, talking to people. The biggest probable problem was things like the disposable barbecue. That, I know that in some of the, certainly the Co-op, we're talking about banning them in their sort of shops where they're in national parks. So that was really positive. But the other side of it is that, on our major sites, Morvamai, we were just snowed under. So, traffic cones or people were coming. It's the same as we get with the snow. They're coming, and how do you deal with that? And I think we're taking a bit of a long-term vision with SLSP to actually invest around Morvamai, especially looking at on-road restrictions, improving the car parks, trying to do that. I mean, I like the idea of people coming on the bus, and we've tried various sustainable bus services over the years, but only a handful of people do. I think until they're unable to particularly access an area, as I've seen some schemes in the Peak District where, in the Goyt Valley, they've taken away the public access down the Goyt Valley and you have to travel on public transport. I think that's the only way you actually really get people on buses. And I know, Emyr, you've got, specific car parks that you encourage people to go into, and then you've got the bus. But as I've seen the photos, people are still trying to get to that, an inch of where they want to start from. So I think it's a real conundrum at this moment in time. But I think there was a good reaction by Welsh Government in trying to reinforce the sort of tourism industry to sort of meet the sort of tidal wave that was hurtling along. And within our authority, the extra resources into rangering and facilities in toilets, etc., was really well received. Thank you.
Yeah, dear Howard.
Yes, thank you, Howard. Certainly the additional facilities to cope with COVID was a help, and we had more wardens, we cleared more litter, cleaned toilets, and a social media officer was totally important. Tegryn, did you want to? Well, to be honest, I was going to make the very same points as Andrew and Howard have just made. So for years now, we've been looking to attract people to places, and they've been coming lately. So we need to be looking at how we communicate and support and encourage people to come back. And I would agree in a way. We have been able to put in place methods to control and support this year because we've had additional funding. So we have a decision to be made for the future to what extent those are going to be a norm, but or are these going to be something that were particular because of COVID? and that we are not going to be able to continue in the same way. So that is an interesting discussion for the future. Yes, thank you, Tegryn. We have got a minute and a half left in this session, so all I'll add is we are working with Gwynedd Council at the moment to measure the impact of tourism. For those of you who aren't aware, usually tourism is measured in two ways: the value of the expenditure and how many beds are in the area. And we've looked at tourism measuring plans across the world, and there is a scheme now being put in place so that we can measure tourism, such as the impact on communities, how much litter is created, how much traffic is coming into the area, and does it impact the quality of the water and so on. So hopefully we'll be able to find a way of measuring that corresponds to our concerns, and if we can standardize that throughout our landscapes, it would be easier to create change. If we report to politicians on the effect of tourism, not just how much money is coming in or the number of beds, we can have a more sustainable system, hopefully. Right, well, I'm in shock a bit because we haven't had a single question on the subject that is supposed to be, that has created a concern for us over the summer. So as landscapes, we've clearly responded very well so that you don't have additional questions. So thank you, Alun, and thank you, panel. And I'll hand over now to the next presentation. Thank you.
Diolch, Alun, a diolch, Emyr. So on to the next part of the session, and this time it's looking at the sort of green COVID recovery, and this is going to be a presentation from Chris Lindley with Howard Sutcliff giving the facilitation on the Q&A. So over to Chris. Diolch.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to take a deep breath while I try and share my screen, and I hope it's going to work. Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. And if I
click on from the beginning and top left there.
Thanks, Alun. Are you seeing that now, Alun?
I'm seeing the first slide, yeah.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I've sort of talk a bit about how the program has been supporting communities in response to COVID and to promote a green recovery. I'm going to go on to my second slide now, and Alun, if you could just confirm you can all see that now.
No. Carry on.
Okay. So I think Eleanor, if you're there, can we use your copy of my presentation? I'll stop sharing now.
Just reading what I think Gitto's added something into. Okay, I'll try and do what Gitto suggested to do there now. Hold on.
While you're looking for that, I just want to say how unflappable I thought Tegryn was when he was faced with the same issue. Great, so I'm seeing the first slide. Hope everyone else is. Great. So if you can move it on to the second one then, Eleanor.
Yeah, I'll just do it like that. Yeah, is that
Yeah.
okay?
That's okay for me. I hope it is for everyone else. So this is what we meant by how we wanted the program to support communities, both obviously in response to COVID and promoting a green recovery. Obviously, at the start of the program, COVID wasn't really on the scene when we first developed the program, and it was very clear that we had to build that into the program and the projects that we were dealing with. If you go on to the next slide, Eleanor. So there's a total of 11 projects contributing to this theme, 4 around creating plans for improving local access to green spaces, and the project I'm going to talk about in a minute really concentrates on that aspect. There's also 2 projects providing grants for community priorities, and another 2 around updating technology to respond to new ways of working that we've all been exposed to. I think it's probably quite apparent to you all that although we've got these 4 themes, obviously there's the benefits of these projects very often span across all of those themes or some of those themes. Go to the next slide, please. So like Alun, I wanted to concentrate on an example that's very specific to one that I've been involved in on the basis of talk about what you know. So one of the main projects for Gower AONB was around Clwydian Valley Country Park. So this is just a location map, just to give you an idea of where it is. It's on the west side of Swansea. It's at the bottom of the valley. The bottom of the valley forms the boundary to the AONB. It's the only country park in Swansea. It's created in the 1980s, and country parks were developed around that time to be promoted as accessible areas of countryside for people to visit and enjoy. And Clwydian Valley itself is over 300 hectares of woodland, riverside, meadow, and other habitats. If you could perhaps go on to the next slide, Eleanor. So that's an aerial shot across the valley towards Killay and Sketty Park. As well as the habitats, underlying it all is a very strong sort of land use history, going back from post-medieval, early coal mining, links to the industrial wealth and power in Swansea. That's reflected in a number of scheduled monuments and other features. There's part of the registered parkland to Clwydian Castle, part of its ancient woodland. There's lots of issues associated with it. So that bit of woodland you can see across the central belt of the woodland is in fact a historic landfill. It was ceased being used in the 1980s, and there's a lot of interesting habitat grown up amongst it. Unfortunately, there's some not so desirable species. So there's a quite an extensive band there of Japanese knotweed. So there's lots of issues for the country park as well. Having said that, it's incredibly well used. There is a part of the National Cycle Network 4 goes up and down the old railway line up along the valley. There is a downhill mountain bike trail. It's very well used by locals for walking, and it is one of the largest accessible green spaces in Swansea, and it's all owned by the council. Next slide, please. So it's a huge, fantastic resource. and we started, the AONB started looking at the country park before the SLSP programme, in that it was very clear that although the country park was valued, but there was lots of issues for it, and there was no strategic approach or coordination to management in the valley. There was no management plan for the valley, with the exception of how to manage the biodiversity resource there. So when we started looking into it, we found that there's at least 15 council departments that have some role in the park, whether that's highways, managing the cycle track, our countryside access team, the biodiversity team, the planning controls in the valley. But there seems to have been little engagement with the local communities and the users, except when issues and problems arise. So this view is looking out towards Mumbles Head, and it just gives you a flavour of how big the woodland is. So it extends up to from Blackpill all the way up to Dunvant. I think it's about 7 kilometres in total. So by the time 2019 came around, and we were starting to have discussions around the SLSP programme, and we were hoping that would really help us to tackle some of the investment issues. And then COVID came along with the restrictions around local lockdowns, staying local, restricting your travel. Many more people either discovered Clwydian for the first time or rediscovered it on their local walks, and there was a very large increase in use, both acceptable use, but also inappropriate uses as well. So much larger number of people using it for informal recreation and walking. We had instances of new mountain bike trails being dug up without warning on a very informal basis, damage to scheduled monuments within the site, etc. So there was a lot of issues for us to tackle. It really raised the profile of the country park, both politically and across the communities that surround the woodland. And so the need for a strategic approach and the need for some capital investment in the country park became even more important. Go to the next slide, please, Eleanor. So we've invested approximately 110,000 over the last financial year and this financial year. Much of that has gone into improving both the public rights of way and the permissive paths that are in the country park. It's very easy to get lost in the country park, and I speak from experience when we first got involved in it. And part of the solution, as well as to improve the public access, it was around making sure that your orientation and the networking is very clear. So you know where you are, you know where you're going. Some of the permissive routes were waymarked about 10 years ago, and if you tried to walk along them, very often they would dissipate into nothing. So we've spent quite a lot of time and resource in getting those back into condition. And when I say we, we've been able to resource a lot of this, but really I need to make a special mention to the Clwydian Valley Community Project in working with us on this, and some of their volunteers are pictured in there as they're installing one of the bridges across one of the permissive routes that goes over the river a couple of times. The community project was set up about 10 or 11 years ago, and it was set up then to conserve the valley and its natural and historic features, promote access and enjoyment and understanding of the valley. It's been a very active group. The communication between the group and the council has been limited in the past few years, and you know, the fact that we've got a more strategic approach now and had some investment, we've really been able to work with them to improve the situation. And I think they've, you know, the recent pandemic and the fact they've had more visitors to the park has actually also boosted the community projects membership now. So they have more than 100 members, and they're really one of a key link for us with the community and you know, making the country park a better place. We've been able to help with them as well as us benefiting from their labour and interest and excitement around the valley. But we've been able to improve their facilities and are looking to improve some of the equipment that they're using in the management of the country park as well. So if we could have the next slide, please, Eleanor. In addition to the management of the rights of way network and the access network, we've been really keen to try and restore some of the heritage features in the country park. I've just got a couple of examples here. So the gates on the top two photos are what were the old one of the old entrances to Sketty Park, an old mansion that has has long been gone and been replaced by a housing estate on the east side of the valley. And as you can see, the gates were in a pretty parlous state. What you can't quite gather from the picture on the left-hand side is there was dog poo being attached to the left-hand side, and we thought that was a real shame. It was not a heritage feature that was recognised. It's not designated in any way, but we were really keen to improve that asset. It coincided as well with an active travel route to the active travel grant fund. We put in a new shared use path along an existing bridle way that now goes through the gate. So the SLSP program has been used to add value to that by improving this sort of feature. And then the picture at the bottom is the Ivy Tower, which is part of the Clwydian Valley arsenic works on the other side of the valley. So a host of issues with that one, as you might imagine. It's it's a scheduled monument. The tower itself is also listed. There were problems around unauthorized access to the tower, issues around contamination, and how you can actually use the tower and the remains and interpret them, still getting visitors to understand and appreciate those sorts of monuments, but obviously not exposing them to potential risks. So we're using the SLSP program to both improve the condition of the monument, make better controls over the access to it, but also interpret it for the public's understanding of the area. If we could then go on to the next slide, some of the things that we want to do going forward with the SLSP program, but also other mechanisms around biodiversity management. There are, as I said previously, there's the issues with Japanese knotweed on the site. The Clyde Valley Community Project have just completed a survey for us on of Japanese knotweed across the site. So they've identified, I think it's 2 hectares of Japanese knotweed that will need looking at across the park as a whole. And it's been great to work with them because now we've got that identified. It's going to be fairly straightforward then for us to contract that control work in the future. This particular area shown here is a sort of fairly open area on the west side of the valley that is having some problems with rhododendron. So that's on the Clyne Castle side, so it's part of the registered parkland with planted rhododendron that has obviously now self-seeded and is now causing biodiversity issues for us. So next slide, please. And then I just want to conclude. There is still lots to do. This has to be done in the context of a management plan for the country park, which we're engaging with the external stakeholders, working particularly with the community project on trying to bring the council's management and recognition of the area as a discrete area that needs its own management objectives and and plan to actually coordinate both our activities and the activities of others and the users in the park all into one framework. And the SLSP program has really given us a good basis from which to do that. So I think even with the uncertainty about whether the program will continue or the level of funding that be continuing, it has enabled us to establish some new relationships with those stakeholders, and there's more of a culture of actually us all talking together and working together on common and shared objectives. So that's the end of my presentation. If I can pass over to Howard now to take us through the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm just sort of thinking, just before we start off, listening to Emyr and his 70 years of the national park, so much of the work that's been done in the past can now fit under either climate change or green infrastructure. What our forefathers were doing was quite often good work, So I think we're seeing a sort of reuse of the titles of some of these, but they've been done in the past. So I think sometimes it's so important to look back as well as looking forward. We've been very lucky within our AONB to now have appointed a climate change and green infrastructure officer, and just someone coming in with a clean slate and able to pick up on some of these new themes, as opposed to taking up some part of someone else's job. It is just fantastic. So Tom's been working on a green infrastructure project for Llangollen, so looking at how we can move people around Llangollen on foot and how we can improve the corridor, for not just keeping cars still in car parks or wherever they've come from, but also for locals' mental and physical health and visitors' local and physical health. We've just turned an old tip site, unused since the 1990s, into a little pocket park. So, again, there's a reuse of something, a brownfield site coming back into sort of public use with footpaths, some planting, and trying to make it accessible to the World Heritage Site, which is consistently overrun at the moment, and all of those things have been done with SLSP money. So I can't see that we've got any questions being added to the list there, but do we have anything from the panel then? Thought Alan was going for a hand then, but obviously not.
I was going to ask Chris, you mentioned that it's a multitude of departments sort of managing this site. I think you said 300 hectares, which is quite a sizable, really, sort of to manage. Looking forward now, sort of with all the investment that's gone in there, is there sort of more of a steer for a department to take a bit more responsibility for it and take that sort of forwards, because it's probably quite difficult to manage with all these different departments, I would imagine.
Thanks, Alan. Yes, it is quite difficult, and I think from experience, if someone was to volunteer to do that, that would be fine, but we'd probably find there wouldn't be the budget to do that. So I think the way we've approached it is that it is very clear that the council needs to have some sort of coordination around this all, and that's what we have stood up to do. We've had the SLSP money to help support that and then invest in the area. And it's quite obviously there are some specific things that we wouldn't want to take away from other departments. The highways department, they're responsible for the management of the national cycle route. They've got the skills, they've got the knowledge and experience of that. It's an adopted highway, and then parks will manage other aspects to it as well, and it's not so much about wresting responsibilities from departments. It's just about making sure there's some sort of coordination to it, and the public know if there's just one point of contact, and if that's the AONB team or the wider natural environment team in the council, that's great, because it means they know where to come, and we are then responsible for making sure the relevant department is notified of a query or can action something.
We had a question about can the audience do things anonymously rather than putting their names in? Just was flagged up, but don't know if that's something we can do. I don't know, maybe Emyr, I don't know whether you think the Murddach Estuary Trail is a useful trail. It's fabulous. Most of us have cycled it at some stage. That's a resource that was taken up by the park, and I think my understanding is managed by the park. A great trail, really attractive, and sustains a lot of people walking and cycling.
Brilliant asset, and what we've learned from that one is that we need to push more, because we've got miles and miles of redundant rail beds, either in old slate workings or abandoned national rail infrastructure, which would be brilliant for recreation and economy. But really, it's a big multi-million-pound task. So yeah, we've got an aspiration for that.
Brilliant. Andrew, we've got you there.
I was going to, and it sort of leads on from what Emyr was saying. There was that question before by Julian Pitt about the National Parks UK programme receiving funding from Gatwick Airport. And, there's a fundamental question about how we fund AONBs and national parks going forward. And we all know that the sums involved are kind of sneezes for the health service or the MOD that and the AONBs receive a fraction of what the national parks receive, but we all need to, as we've all been saying, that greater investment in the landscapes and in the organisations, and to be able to manage them effectively. That question is there. I don't know whether anyone wants to answer it, or whether anyone feels there are no simple answers, and particularly with the funding constraints, we're all waiting to hear what the budget and the spending reviews will be and allocations going forward.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Andrew, that I think in some ways, Tegryn earlier on sort of brought that to the attention, whether the numbers of visitors stay the same and we've got an enhanced investment in the parks and the AONBs through the COVID funds, or whether the numbers go back down. And if it stays the same, how will that be something that Welsh Government at this point in time, as they're the funders, keep up that level of funding? So I think there's an important question around that. I don't know whether anyone, Simon, you want to say something at this point about? Maybe not.
I'm sorry. Yeah, yes, Howard. I'm just unmuting myself. Hello, everyone. There we go. Yeah, I mean, certainly in the last couple of years, we've built our support for all the designated landscapes, and sort of this partnership's a key part of that. I think one of the things that's been a real key feature and has come through today is the importance of that sort of partnership working, and we'll be certainly looking to build on that. There's some interesting questions today around things like the 30 by 30 initiative, and the role of designated landscapes in nature recovery. I mean, I think certainly from my perspective, slightly biased as being sort of the lead officer in the government in this area, is that the designated landscapes are uniquely positioned in this area. They're already set up. In my view, the way I express it to colleagues, as delivery agents. There's challenges and opportunities, of course. The challenge is, one of the challenges around funding, another key challenge is around the amount of land that there's no landscape zone and therefore have direct control over. But that's why the projects have been illustrated, and some of the the themes that have come through around partnership and that sort of thing are key. I think it's inherent on all of us to sort of continue to build this work, and certainly I'll be making the case that, to continue to provide the support that we have done in the last few years.
Simon, do you think that the funding, especially around COVID, probably wasn't from your department, it was direct from some sort of central services, whether there's any work being done on to see how much of that was put into protected landscapes?
I think with COVID, I think the thing I'd emphasise out of that is, all the designated landscapes did an excellent job in responding to sort of new and unique pressures very quickly, and that was recognised. I think it's very much helped build, the recognition and some strong relationships. I think, sort of particularly with our Visit Wales colleagues and that sort of thing, that will continue to be important as we go forward. So certainly that's been useful, and again, I think it's that partnership working that's come to the fore. Need to continue to sort of build on that, communications and being able to demonstrate. I think the sort of the network of value that the designated landscapes can offer, is what, as we've been talking about, is something, again, that collectively we'll all need to work on.
Thank you. Chris, you had your hand up and now your hand's gone down.
So, yeah, thanks, Howard. It was just I was just trawling through the comments and questions, and I think there was one around there about national parks and the Palladium partnership. I think it was Paul who mentioned it. Have we got an answer to that one?
Yes, could I come in on that? So before Paul gives us the details, it's a partnership between all the landscapes on the national park level. South Downs have received sponsorship through this, and I'm not sure how they squared that up with the ethical problem, if you like, of having so much industry there. Maybe that's something that Tegryn will need to reply in the near future, because there are so many carbon emissions.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to leave. We've got a fire alarm going. Emyr, yeah, I think I'm going to have to depart. So apologies, but if you can carry on, I'll be back if I can.
Okay, the only thing I was going to say now is we've had a discussion with Welsh Government's officials regarding accessing private funding, and there's a bit of nervousness around attracting private funding, especially after the recent discussion around the previous conversation around trees and losing farms and so on. But I'll hand over now to Paul with more technical details.
Diolch, Emyr. So just to briefly sort of go over it, what I would suggest is people visit the Net Zero with Nature website or web page on the National Parks UK website. There's also a page that links through to the financial instrument that's been set up called Revere, R-E-V-E-R-E, that was launched earlier this month. So you can find more details on precisely what's involved in the scheme. The Palladium Group is effectively the honest broker between ourselves and the potential investors. We're not actually getting to hear everyone who they are lining up with. Yes, I've learned very recently about Gatwick Airport, and I've got to be honest. Emyr's right. We will actually consider the ethical dilemma of who we choose to partner up with. That said, the sums of money involved aren't enormous, and they are being spread between several different national park authorities as well in different cases. So the Welsh National Park authorities haven't yet been approached. We are, if you like, in the second tranche of national park authorities that will get any kind of detailed attention. What we've done so far is we've worked up the details of our, if you like, the portfolio that we can offer, and now we're waiting to see, who that might reel in. But that isn't to say that won't necessarily be the only option for these kind of natural capital accounts that we might be looking to develop. What we're also using this process for is to learn about this world, because it's a different set of It's a different set of skills than, if you like, the kind of traditional approach to nature conservation, nature recovery that we are much more familiar and expert in. Not an entirely satisfactory answer, but like I say, this is a new world that we're moving into. Thank you.
So there's three questions now in the chat. One from David. Is land management essentially for people and nature both now and tomorrow? If so, might this be in tandem and push more explicitly and harder? And I think we'd probably, unless anyone disagrees, I think, yes, I would suggest that is the way that we're sort of seeing things going. All green infrastructure, for example, should have some sort of human context in it in terms of, mindfulness, well-being, etc. I don't quite understand the next one, unless it means Prince of Wales. Off the wall, but could AONBs reasonably expect encouragement from the POW? So I can't think what else it can be, to achieve greater funding. So I don't really know unless anybody has a hand up to that. Can't see, nope. Can't really answer that one unless it was the Prince of Wales is coming with some cash to us. That'd be rather nice. And a question to Simon. Why no funding from Welsh Government to AONBs to put more frontline staff in place to manage a visitor influx? So I think that's a good question. It's something that we, as certainly the AONBs, will sort of, without revenue, we can't put more staff on the ground. Capital is great, but we need those sort of resources to have the staff on the ground. I don't know whether, Simon, you'd want to answer that, or whether I'd just answer that for you.
Funding questions are always, sort of difficult. the additional funding has been, provided to across all the designated landscapes during COVID to address some of the issues. I mean, we do have slightly different funding relationships. We have different funding relationships between the national parks and the AONBs, and they are set up differently. And those sorts of things get taken in, influence some influences that are a part of funding decisions that are made. I don't know that I can really say too much more than that. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on funding, and we try to make it go as far as we can.
Okay, Chris, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Howard. Yeah, it was just in relation to that. I think the relationship as far as additional staff to the national parks is quite is quite an obvious obvious link between Welsh Government and the national parks. It might be a bit more hidden with the AONBs, because obviously our AONB unit, we've got 3 people at the moment to double that resource in terms of wardens or rangers to help control matters will be difficult to do. But there are lots of other council departments which have probably benefited from additional resources indirectly from Welsh Government, whether to fund increased litter picking or increased waste disposal at sites and things like that. But that doesn't necessarily register as a benefit to the AONBs directly.
Okay, thank you. And John's asked a question: what are the panel's thoughts on the role of the third sector in involving DL partnerships and shared closer relationships currently and in terms of ambition? I don't know whether anyone feels they could answer that. I mean, yes, we're getting a lot of hands there. Paul, come to you first.
Thank you. Well, we are trying to involve the third sector extremely closely through, for example, the local nature partnership underpinning the Nature Recovery Action Plan. I think the challenge for us all is to find ways of developing shared objectives and shared visions, because when you bring different organizations together and you bring officers together, what you tend to find sometimes is officers will sit on their hands because they don't feel empowered to make decisions on behalf of their organizations. So you have to kind of think, okay, well, how do we get past that on the one hand, and on the other, organizations have to kind of fight for funding, fight for resources, fight for attention, fight for delivering their own organizational objectives. But what I would say is, national parks and AONBs are pretty large areas. This might be an opportunity where we just have to throw our lot in together and really try and find ways of getting more people, more organizations, more active in more places, more of the time, rather than trying to deliver separate, discrete little projects the whole time.
I think one of the problems really is that a lot of the third sector organisations have almost been forced into chasing funding, and not necessarily in their sort of core interests. We've seen developments of the wildlife trusts and also Keep Wales Tidy move into other sorts of areas of work that they've not been engaged in the past. And primarily I think it's just to keep the organisation moving forward, or to stop them disappearing altogether, which is, a fair point.
Yeah, and I would just come back on that very quickly to say, if we're going to deliver more, bigger, better, and more joined up, then we need to be more, bigger, better, and more joined up as well, rather than organisations that are just chasing to breast the finish tape before the next one does.
Yeah. Andrew, and then we've got Emyr.
Yeah, just to say, we're just finalising approval for a National Heritage Lottery Fund, Nature Networks Fund project, absolutely hand in hand with Gwent Wildlife Trust and the Woodland Trust in the Wye Valley. So it's 18 months funding looking at that consolidation, the connectivity in the landscape, and working both on those sites owned and managed by those third sector organisations, like I said, on connectivity with farmers and landowners and local communities to get that, exactly as Paul said, that bigger, better, more joined up approach. You know, the shame is it's only 18 months funding. You know, that should be whatever 18 years funding to roll forwards, you know, and really achieve that bigger, better, more joined up on a cohesive scale, and then we really will be answering that 30 by 30 conundrum.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Emyr?
Yeah, just point to the sector.
With the third sector, it's all important. Well, what we've done in Eryri, we've totally changed our approach, and what we have to remember is that we have to deal with the volunteers from the third sector with respect, and we have to support them well with training and equipment and encouragement, and so it's not a resource that's not without its troubles, but it's worthwhile. We must remember that these are landscapes for people. People create them, people appreciate them. So we haven't been well, what's held us back in recent years when we had more money was the accusation that we were undermining permanent jobs with volunteers. But the argument has moved beyond that. It's now how people can contribute and feel good about the area. And I do welcome that movement. Thank you.
Diolch, Emyr. We've got another question on from David. On the grounds and needs of others' money equals compromises. How then to assess any undesirable consequences in the shared across designated area way? Is that your hand still up, Emyr? Oh, no. Yes, Emyr, back to you.
No, it's not my hand, but I don't understand the question.
No. David could rewrite the question. Paul, we had your hand up.
Well, I'll attempt to understand the question. I think this is if you end up in partnerships, you're going to have to make compromises in order to get along and achieve things. Well, yes, of course. That's the nature of living in a democratic country. Nothing's ever quite what you want it to be. And thank goodness it's not ever quite what you want it to be, because that wouldn't necessarily be a pleasant world to live in if someone was always right. I hasten to add. That's actually part of the excitement of developing partnerships, is actually trying to find a common ground where, yeah, maybe it feels like a compromise, but in fact, you have to allow your own points of view and your own ambitions to be adjusted as a consequence of working with other people. That is the challenge. That's what relationship management is all about. And yes, you can try and use the strongest evidence possible. And I would say evidence is important when you're going into form partnerships. But we, in this part of the world, for example, we are identifying 6 spatial areas across the national park where we expect to be able to deliver or develop kind of restoration programs, coastal inclusion programs, call it what you will, at scale. And we've already got a couple of them already established. And what we're hoping to do by doing that is actually to live that instruction from the IUCN Category 5 guidelines, which is to try and achieve decision making at the most local level possible, involving as many people locally as you possibly can, bringing in the national and international picture and expertise where you can. But that's where the good stuff is actually achieving things through in an informed way with people, rather than just relying on first principles and gut instinct the whole time.
Yeah, I think one of the issues around all of that is, when you start looking at who your partners are, and the quarrying industry is quite there in sort of its sort of chipping away at either the edges of AONBs, national parks. Those are sort of organisations, it sort of troubles you, but they're going to carry on whatever. They've got planning permission, they're legitimate. So, you're right, it's how you work with them. Thanks, Paul. Andrew?
Yeah, just to echo what Paul was saying, really. I mean, for us in the Wye Valley AONB, we don't own or manage any land directly. Everything we do is in collaboration and in partnership. And therefore, yes, you could argue that's compromises, but actually it focuses your energy on the areas where you can maximize the benefit and work with those people with the same aspirations, and therefore you're magnifying and maximizing the value for money and the opportunities. And as I said earlier about, then the challenge is to bring other people on to understand what you're doing and draw them along, which is, the wider sort of promotion and PR and communication strategy to help other people understand the benefits of what we're all working for, which is obviously is to conserve and enhance these outstanding landscapes. Thanks.
Sorry, I can't see any more questions there. Anyone has any final things they wish to say? I think Paul summed up some interesting points there about the companies and compromises, and colleagues have contributed. David's done a lot of fabulous questions in the questions and answers there. So thank you very much for all those different questions as well. Shall I hand back to you, Chris, at that point?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Howard. And thank you all. I think there's been some really stimulating discussions, as well as the actual presentations themselves. I'll just sum up sort of very, very quickly, I think, because we're kind of running out of time. Thank you all for staying the course and staying with us and listening to the presentations. And thank you for your questions. There's some really stimulating things there for us, I think, both in terms of what we've done in the past, but also hopefully in whatever format the SLSP programme goes forward. I think there's still lots that we want to do and intend to do as a partnership, I think that what we have done to date has been a good basis for that. I'd like to just make a point. There are, as well as the work we've done and sort of learning lessons from that, I think there are some clear opportunities going forward about some of the collaborative projects that we're looking to do across the landscape. There's key issues and opportunities that are facing us all, and we can make the most effective use of resources by having more emphasis on collaborative projects, and that's certainly something I'm keen to pursue in the future. I think just to sort of wind things up, I'd like to thank all the presenters and the Landscapes Wales officers today. I'd like to thank the translation service as well for helping us out. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for participating. I think there might still be a few questions left in the Q&A thing. I think we will review what's in there and make sure there are some answers supplied to anything that we've missed. The recording of the seminar today will be available. I think either Ruth or Ellen and I will be able to send out the link in due course. So I think that's it. Anything else from you, Ruth? Otherwise, thank you all very much for your participation today, and hope to see you soon.
Diolch pawb.
No.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Take care.
Well.